Good morning, artists. It's me, Mr. Noah. This week I have a new special guest, Darth Vader. Say hi, Darth Vader. Okay. So this is a specific 6th grade lesson. Before we left, we were working on something called a dragon's eye. However, we can't really do that since not a lot of people have acrylic paints, a lot of people can't go outside. It's really difficult for me to do that on a video. So what we're gonna do is shift gears, and I'm gonna talk specifically more about composing your pictures, which means where are you placing things on a piece of paper. Our assignment is going to be a collage. However, this is gonna be, I want you to do the collage in a specific way to show the ideas that we have discussed.
Okay, 6th graders. So as we discuss composition, which is how you're putting things on your page, we're going to start with something called focal point. The focal point is the area of the picture that an artist wants you to focus on. Usually an artist will make one part of their painting or drawing the focal point. So in this picture by Edgar Degas, we can see this little girl standing by this box, and the focal point for this one would be her face. Usually in a picture, if there's a picture of a person's face, our eye will automatically be drawn there. So in this case, the focal point of this painting is this girl's face. In this picture of this angel by Gustav Miro, you'll see that this is the focal point right here where the face is. It's even circled with a circle. In this landscape painting by James Ensor, this little tower right here is our focal point, right here in the center of our paper. And obviously in the Scream by Edvard Munch, you will see that our screaming character right here is our focal point. Again, usually a face is the focal point of a picture, wherever they place that in the picture. In Claude Monet's painting called the Soleil Levant, which is a sunrise, you'll see that this bright orange sun right here on the top is probably going to be our focal point for that one. And not every single painting or piece of art has to have a focal point. For example, this one by Giacomo Balla, it's called Turin. You don't really see any sort of focal point. Your eye kind of travels around the painting. So this causes motion and energy, but there really is no main focal point where the artist wants you to look. The artist actually wants you to look everywhere on the painting on this one. This is also a really good example of no focal point. This is Joan Miro. This is called the Harlequin's Carnival. So it kind of looks like a big circus or something. And the artist didn't want you to look at any specific spot. He wanted your eye to travel all over this painting and drawing. So he didn't place a specific thing that was the focal point of this picture. So the first way to create a focal point in your art is by contrast. Contrast can mean two different things. It means putting a light value next to a dark value. So in this case, there's a black dot here on this white page, and obviously that is exactly where your eye is going to look because there's so much contrast against that black and white. Or you can put an object next to a very different object. So in this case, this orange triangle stands out against all of these black circles because it's the only triangle that in the whole picture, and it's the only thing that has color. So it definitely stands out and is the focal point of this picture. In this painting by Giorgio Renoir, you can see that the moon up here, or the sun, is definitely our focal point because it is the lightest part of this entire picture against this dark background. So it really sticks out like a sore thumb right there. Here's also an abstract picture, and you'll notice that the circle is definitely our focal point because it's the only round object on this whole piece of paper. Everything else is a rectangle and is mostly dark. This one stands out because of contrast. Another way we can create a focal point is by isolation. Putting something by itself in the picture. So in this case, this little box right here is our focal point because he's all alone on the picture all by himself. In this painting by Giorgio de Chirico, you'll see that the clock is our focal point up here because it is all isolated. Even though it's on this brick wall, the brick wall sort of acts as negative space in this particular case, and it sits all by itself with nothing touching around it, so that becomes isolated and is our focal point. In this painting by Pablo Picasso, we can see that this lady is our focal point because she is isolated from everybody else in the group. So just by being apart from everybody else, our eye will automatically go right towards this girl because she is isolated. In this other Pablo Picasso painting called Figures on the Beach, you can see that this person right here is isolated from everybody else, kind of sits up here in the corner, everything else is together in a big group. So by isolating this person, you just created a focal point. The third way that you can create a focal point on your painting or drawing is by placement. And that just means strategically placing an object on your paper. Strategically just means that you're thinking ahead and you're doing it on purpose. So there's 5 places on a piece of paper or on a canvas where people will normally look. If you place an object right in the center of your paper, that's usually where people will look first. But they will also like to look here, 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 and here. And notice how they're not in the actual corners of your paper. They're kind of floating away from the corners. These 4 spots are really good places to put a focal point. In this painting by Henri Matisse, it's of some goldfish, you'll see that he placed the goldfish right in the center of his painting. So this became the focal point because there's a lot of stuff going on around it. By putting it right in the center, it helps focus our attention right in the middle. This painting also by Giorgio de Chirico, he placed his one of his focal points right here in the center of his paper or his canvas because he wanted us to focus right here in the middle. In this painting by Rene Magritte, you'll see that he placed the lion down here in this bottom corner, which is another great place to put a focal point. Not directly in the corner, but kind of floating away from the corner. So here, 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 or here would have been really good places to place that lion. In this painting by Edward Hopper, you'll see that he put his focal point kind of down here in the corner. It's not right in the center, it's not right in the corner, it's just kind of off to the side just a little bit. So all these little areas right here are really good places for focal points, and he decided to put his kind of down here in the corner. And the fourth way to create a focal point is something called convergence. This might be almost cheating, but a lot of artists use this. It's when you're using lines or implied lines to point at your object. So literally you're pointing right to the thing you want your viewer to look at. So in this case, I did a really quick little landscape of a house sitting on a hill, but the path that leads up to the house is pointing at it. All the lines of the mountains point right to it. The clouds point right to it. So pretty much every line in this little picture is pointing directly where I want your eye to look. In this beautiful landscape by Carl Friedrich Schnickel, you'll see a lot of lines pointing to our focal point. These lines right here come down and point right at him. The pathway points toward him. All of these clouds in the background get smaller and smaller and smaller and point to them. This tree right here also points to our focal point. This is a really good example of converging lines. I mean, do you know where the artist wants you to look? I mean, he's literally pointing at it. So this person is pointing down here. All of these lines from the mountains are pointing directly down at these little flowers down here. This line right here comes right to it. This line goes right to it. This line goes straight to it. So everything in this painting pretty much is pointing directly here where he wants you to look. And here's one last example by Renoir. The artist wants you to look right here at the piano book. And so not only are they looking directly at it, pointing there, the lines of the drapery point right to it. The bottom here actually makes an arrow that points directly to it. In our final example, there's no reason that you can't use all of those tools. So this is a really beautiful painting by Arnold Bocklin. It's called The Island of the Dead. And you'll notice that he pretty much uses every single one of the focal point ideas. So first of all, he uses contrast because the little figure standing in this boat is completely white next to a black background. So this really stands out quite a bit. He is also using isolation because this little boat is kind of sitting all by itself with really nothing around it, just a lot of black. So it kind of sits by itself. That's isolation. He also placed it in a nice place. It's not right in the center of our paper. It's off to the side just a little bit. And converging lines. There's lines here pointing at it, lines here pointing, these point at it, this line points at it, and this line points at it. So everything in this picture is directing your eye right to that person sitting in the boat. Sixth graders, your assignment is to make a collage with an obvious focal point. Use at least 2 of the methods that I just showed you to create your focal point. So I want you to use some sort of contrast or isolation or placement or converging points to create this focal point. So since we're going to be making a collage, you're going to need some materials, definitely some paper. I'm probably going to use this really nice red. You're going to need a pair of scissors, glue stick or glue, and of course a bunch of magazines or old books or comic books that you can cut up so you can find some pictures. So before you start your collage, you may want to maybe put a mark where you want your focal point to be. And like I said, placement is really important in a focal point. I don't want to just place it right in the center. That might be a little bit too boring. So I'm going to place my focal point in one of these spots. So either here, 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 or here. So go ahead and decide where you want your focal point to be, and that's where everything is going to point to. So what you may want to do is go through some magazines and stuff and cut everything out really, really nice first. So you don't have to worry about that later. So I just took some of my time and I went through a bunch of comics and all kinds of stuff, and I just cut out things that I thought I could use for this collage or things that I wanted to use. So now I'm going to try to assemble it now so that there is a focal point right there. Okay, I haven't glued everything down yet because I just wanted to make sure everything is exactly where I want it before I start gluing it down. But as you can see, I pretty much used every one of our methods for creating a focal point. First of all, I used contrast. So there's a lot of black behind this white circle, so it really pops out against the background. Also, I used isolation. It kind of sits by itself. Pretty much everything else is touching, or I make it touch. So this is the only one that's not really touching anything else in the picture. And I use placement because I placed it in one of these 4 corners of instead of right in the center. And I used a lot of convergence. It's one of the best ways to create a focal point. Pretty much everything in this picture is pointing directly at my focal point. This little baby is pointing right to it. This guy's looking at it. Her whole body is pointing to it. Her eyes are looking at it. The bottom of these feet on the flea is pointing up at it. His guitar is pointing at it. This worm is pointing at it. This antenna is pointing at it. So almost everything in this composition is pointing right at my focal point because that's where I want you to look. Since I didn't glue everything down, I decided to play around with it a little bit and just see if I can make a different kind of focal point. So in this case, I did isolation again, and I did convergence because everybody's pointing to that place again, but he is sitting all by himself this time with nothing touching him. In this example, I decided to change what my focal point was, so I decided to make this girl the focal point now. So I isolated her up in this corner by herself, and everything else is kind of pushed over here. So that creates a focal point because she's by herself, and everything else is grouped together on one side of the picture. I also have some convergence because some of these things are pointing at her, but I think the main thing I'm doing here is just isolating her by herself. Okay, artists, that's gonna do it for today. I'm gonna clean up my studio a little bit here. It was really nice having you here today, Darth Vader. Whatever. And please email me when you've completed this. Go on Google Classroom. There should be an assignment, and I think you can also submit your assignment there. Please send a picture or an email that you've completed this. And good luck with all those collages, everybody.